All right, so hello everybody. This video is going to be looking at St. Thomas Aquinas, and I'm going to start off just by providing the kind of big picture of how we get to Aquinas in the first place, and then we'll look into his philosophy. This video is not going to be focusing on the reading. I'll say a little bit about that reading at the end, but I wanted to give you kind of like the big picture of where Aquinas is coming from, see how it relates to, well, Aristotle, for example, and other philosophers. So what I've got here is, an old map of the world. Aquinas is someone we're going to be looking at here in Rome, in modern day Italy. He is going to influence people like Galileo, who will be the start of the scientific revolution. And he, in turn, was influenced by, quite a few people. Just to highlight a few important sources, we've got the ancient Hebrew people coming from Judea, we could call it, Palestine. There is St. Paul of Tarsus, basically the inventor or the founder of Christianity. We spent a little bit of time talking about him. So Paul, in turn, and Christianity has a big influence on St. Augustine, who was an important philosopher in the late Roman Empire in northern Africa. We also are going to be seeing that there is influence from Greek philosophers going into Aquinas, most notably Aristotle. That Aristotle's philosophy was hugely influential. Basically, what Aquinas did was he took Aristotle's ideas and more or less copied them. Just copied them, but it sort of synthesized them with Christian faith. All right, so let's get into St. Thomas Aquinas. Uh, he is writing roughly 900 years ago, late Middle Ages, at a point where Europe is starting to creep into, well, enlightenment in a way. That Europe is starting to regain the knowledge that it lost when the Roman Empire fell apart, in part because they're stealing or borrowing a lot of great ideas from the Islamic world, and the Middle East, the Islamic world, is also borrowing a lot of ideas from India and China. All right, so what is his philosophy? Well, for starters, one of the sort of like bedrock views of how we should try to acquire knowledge in the first place is this principle of trust the appearances. This is very much like Aristotle. Aristotle thinks that the right way to do philosophy is to start off with what we observe, and also start off with common sense. So, part of trust the appearances is this view called direct realism. According to direct realism, the world is basically as it seems to be. That if things appear to be purple, then they are purple. And if you look at a white wall, then you have very good reason to think that that wall is white because you see it as white. And honey is sweet. Well, how do we know honey is sweet? Well, because we have tasted it as sweet. So just kind of silly example to show this, that when you see a tree with green leaves and brown bark, uh, you're seeing it that way because that's how it is in reality. All right, well, why would anyone doubt that? Actually, a lot of people with the scientific revolution are going to question whether things like the sweetness of honey or the smell of flowers or the appearance of things is actually how things are outside of the mind. Second, kind of related to that, is that he embraces an intuitive approach to philosophy. The intuitive idea is, well, go with common sense. Trust what seems to be right. Of course, we could be wrong, but it's good for us to start with common sense. All right. Third, kind of going along with this idea of trust the appearances, is sorry, my picture might be getting in the way here. That he makes a distinction between matter and form. What is that about? I'll give an example with a butterfly or a caterpillar. The caterpillar has the form of a caterpillar and the matter of, well, the material stuff that it is made of. Well, the caterpillar then goes into a cocoon, and while it's in the cocoon, it transforms into a butterfly. What Aquinas would say is that the material that made up that caterpillar butterfly has not changed. I mean, while it's in the cocoon, right, the material just can't change. It's a closed environment. But the form changed. It changed from having the essence of a caterpillar to the essence of a butterfly. All right, so moving on. Like basically everybody in the ancient world, Aquinas endorses what's known as geocentrism, the view that Earth is at the center of the universe. Now, a lot of folks in the ancient world thought that Earth was flat, which was very reasonable at the time. They didn't know any better. But actually, medieval Christian monks and scholars did know better than the flat Earth thing. Actually, some people have known that Earth is round for about 3,000 years or so. All right, so by this time, 900 years ago, they know that Earth is round. Good on them. I mean, that takes some good, serious work with astronomy to figure out, and they figured it out. But they believed that everything circles around the Earth, and on the kind of outermost layer, you have this giant dome of stars, uh, and that dome is circling around just like everything else. Um, Now, next, they believed in the Middle Ages, or at least Aquinas is believing, in what's known as the five elements theory. Now, there are four elements that you can probably guess that almost every civilization in the ancient world believed in: earth, air, water, and fire. In addition, they also believed that there is a fundamental distinction between heaven and earth. So Earth is made up, or planet Earth is made up of four elements: earth, water, wind, and fire. But then there's the separate element that makes up the outer stuff, the celestial or the heavenly bodies. The heavenly bodies are made up of ether, or what is sometimes known as quintessence. The quintessence, which just means fifth element, is a perfect substance, perfect in every possible way. Well, why think it's perfect? Couple of reasons. One is it just seems to be how we observe things. Like the moon seems to be a perfect sphere. Same thing with the stars, I guess, or at least the sun. And there is perfect regular motion of the stars, the planets, the moon, and the sun going around the Earth. Very reliable. I mean, more reliable than anything that happens here on Earth. And it also makes sense to think of the heavenly sphere as perfect because, well, it's heaven. I mean, that's where God is. And if that is God's realm, uncorrupted by the sins of man, then it does kind of make sense that that would have a kind of divine heavenly perfection to it. Um, and so, not just in heaven, but also here on earth, there is a belief in a divine order, that there is a proper way that things are supposed to be, a way that God has intended for them to be. Right, that God designed this universe so that like each thing would be in its proper place, that the moon would be the closest to Earth, then followed by the planets, then followed by the sun, and the stars in the outer area. Um, and it's not just the planets that have their proper place. They held what is called a teleological worldview. Uh, Teleology, it means purpose, or telos means purpose. And teleology is the idea that there is purpose to be found out there in the world. And they meant everywhere. I mean, humans have a purpose defined by our nature, the nature that God has given us, as do animals and plants. And even inanimate stuff has a purpose. I mean, if we go back to this picture here, right, with each of the elements, Earth has the purpose of being at the center of the universe. Water is supposed to be above the earth, then the air, then the fire, and the stars were designed by God to be in that outermost layer. All right, so that's the teleological worldview. Now, what about human beings? This is the part that's going to relate most directly to what we're reading. Like Aristotle, Aquinas is defining human beings according to our three different natures, our three different faculties. We are living beings, which is the vegetative spirit, the plant soul, if you wish. Then we are also animated beings, like animals, and so this gives us perception and emotion, sociality, like socializing with people. Um, some form of communication, moving around, all that kind of stuff. But then what makes us human is that on top of those two layers, there's this outer layer of rationality, logic, language, intellect, the ability to think abstractly, the ability to like understand what happened 3 days ago and to understand the difference between 3 days ago and 4 days ago. So like complex mathematical abilities would also be part of this. So our rational soul is what most fundamentally defines us as humans. Well, I guess life is what's most fundamental, but rationality is what makes us most unique, and so that's going to be the most special trait. Um, kind of going along with the ideas, well, actually very much going along with the ideas of Martin Luther King. King drew from Aquinas, is that Aquinas endorses a natural law perspective on morality. Morality and law should align with God's design or God's purpose for the universe. Well, how do we figure out God's purpose? Of course, you can read the Bible, but Aquinas didn't want to just say, go read the Bible. He wanted to tell a story where anybody, no matter where they came from, no matter what books they had access to, anybody would be able to figure out God's purpose for them. And you figure out God's purpose by thinking about what you are as a human being. You are you are like plants in that you need nutrition. So getting nutrition is good for us as human beings. Like animals, you are a being that can move. So move, get some exercise. It's what you were made to do as a human being. Go out and play. And we are also rational beings, and that's probably the most important part. And so it is part of our nature to think and to reason, to use logic. And so it is proper and right for humans to use their minds to develop knowledge. And so kind of living according to this natural law is what makes you a full human being. And then final point on trying to outline his philosophy is that there is a fundamental distinction between the living and the non-living world. That life things have the essence of life. If we go back to matter versus form, there's a big difference between a corpse and a living being. They have the same material, more or less, but the human being, or the living being, I mean, has the form of life. And they believe no non-living things can possibly be living because they don't have the form of life within them. This will be relevant perhaps if we think about like artificial intelligence or the possibility of artificial intelligence. All right, so now I'm going to finish off by specifically thinking about the arguments that Aquinas makes in the piece that I asked you to read. The arguments he's presenting very much are connecting up with his vision of human nature, that we are rational, animated living beings, which is to say that we are living organisms. And so what he's trying to do in this short piece from his book is to provide arguments, what he calls like objections, to alternative philosophies, to try to show that we are physical beings, that we as organisms are made up of material and we are made up of form. So what he's doing here is he is rejecting the alternative Plato-inspired view. Plato was another ancient Greek philosopher, actually the one that taught Aristotle. Plato believed in more of this like abstract notion of the mind, where the self is sort of separated from the material universe. Plato wasn't alone in this, but he's a big person defending that philosophy. And St. Augustine, who I briefly mentioned earlier, Augustine was inspired by Plato and had Plato's more esoteric vision of human nature. Well, Aristotle wants to bring it back down to earth. He wants his intuitive philosophy. He wants common sense. And common sense suggests that I am a human being. What does it mean to be a human being? Well, it means that I am a creature that weighs something like, 150, 200, 250 pounds. But no non-physical thing could possibly weigh anything because it wouldn't be part of the physical universe. All right, so what Aquinas is doing in this piece is he is providing reasons to support his materialistic or physical approach to understanding human nature. Part of this is going to be the argument that generally only physical things are capable of influencing physical things. This is more or less like the modern physics idea of the conservation of mass and energy. That you can't get movement out of nothing. Movement has to come from movement. There has to be energy in order for there to be energy. Or now we know that you can transform matter into energy or vice versa. He didn't know that. But the point he's trying to make is that we very clearly know that we are in control of our bodies. The only way we could be in control of our bodies is if we ourselves are part of this material universe. And that's also the only way that we could have a proper kind of knowledge of things, because going along with direct realism, your knowledge of the tree as being green is based on you